When the radio bug bites you, it can happen in an instant.
Within an hour of going on air there, it was like, okay, cool, I've got to do this.
And before long, you've moved from community radio to commercial.
It was one of those little tiny country radio stations run on the smell of an oily rag, and man, you had to learn to do everything real quick.
But as important as radio can be for a community,
the emergency services communication system broke down that afternoon. Literally, it collapsed.
it's easy to lose sight of the more important things.
I just put my job way ahead of my family.
A change of career can be a great thing.
Every experience is built upon the last one, and I've taken a bit out of my last job and last careers into the next career and the next job.
And at the end of your career, you can always go back to the start.
It's all old gear and, you get to push buttons.
May your best years be ahead of you. I'm Andy Marr, and this is Off Mic, Life After Radio. Geoff Fisher is a corporate and government communications coach based in Canberra. Before that, though, he was a radio pro, taking the well-worn path from community to small-town commercial and then into larger markets. But after a bit of a light bulb moment involving his young son, Geoff left radio and he realised that his skill set was ideal for corporate communications, coaching and change management. After a brilliant and very unique career, Geoff has recently retired from full-time work. But, would you believe it, he's now taking on radio from a very different angle. A quick note on the video of this if you're watching on YouTube. There's about 3 minutes in the middle where it gets a little bit grainy in the video on Geoff's side. I've popped a little moving progress bar across the bottom of the screen if it's distracting, but it isn't for long. Geoff Fisher, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Let's start off with where you are right now. Congrats on your very, very recent retirement.
Yeah, thank you. Last week I finished up full-time work. My wife and I both finished up on the same day, and we're calling it our Great Reset and looking to just reset the way we do life a little. Lots of travel coming up. So, yeah, it's an exciting time.
Well, yeah, this podcast is kind of a little bit about a life reset to a degree, I suppose, because sometimes when you move out of radio, you just sort of just veer off into other things, and sometimes you just do a 180. And I get the impression that maybe not necessarily a 180 for you, but it was one particular moment that really lit things up for you, if I remember. But we'll get to that. Let's start firstly with where radio started for you in your life. How did you get interested in radio as a kid?
I guess I was always interested in presenting, performing. I was into, at school, I was into things like debating and believe it or not, I actually went and did work experience in Year 10 at 2AD in Armidale, which was our local radio station. They had me for a week's work experience. You had to put down to go somewhere, and I lived in a little country town. I thought, radio station, that sounds cool, I'll go do that. But veered off into other things, and believe it or not, I went and got into chartered accountancy and spent about 5 years on and off working in chartered accountancy, which was the worst career decision ever because I'm just not a numbers person at all. The moment it really piqued my interest back in radio was I'd moved to Tamworth in northern New South Wales, and I was in a little corner store milk bar, and they had the program guide for 2UFM, the community radio station in Tamworth, on their bench there. And I picked it up because, if I can be really honest, 2TM at the time wasn't a great listen, and there was no streaming services. And on the back there was a come volunteer with us form. So I thought, hey, I'll go do that. So I did. And literally within an hour of going on air there, it was like, okay, cool, I've got to do this. This is something I want to do for a job. And so from there I set about improving my skills, and I applied to get into Australian Film, Television and Radio School in Sydney, and was lucky enough to get in 89.
Class of 89, okay.
Yeah, heck of a long time ago now. So yeah, I lived at the house in North Ryde. It's now moved, obviously, but we're
Rowenda
based
Cottage.
on in the cottage, the Rowenda. Yeah,
I lived there too.
Did you really? That house was a legendary house. We had some great times in that house. A whole bunch of radio students getting together.
So after dodging the cockroaches at Rowenda Cottage, you ended up at your first radio job, and where was that?
2PK in Parks, which was a great first gig. It was one of those little tiny country radio stations run on the smell of an oily rag, and man, you had to learn to do everything real quick. One of the great skills I learned there was on a Saturday, and I used to work Saturdays, they did three-way turf talk in the morning, and then the races all Saturday afternoon, and that was just enormous at an early stage in a radio career to learn how to do multiple things at once, to listen to multiple feeds, to, split your cans, talk at the same time as well as listening to results out of Doomben so you could relay them back and be recording the local trots because the trots had called in and you were recording them down the line, etc. It was awesome experience. I'm not a horse racing fan, but that was just an amazing way to learn how to do your craft.
Yeah, and in those early years, you did that classic radio thing of going all over the map. You went to New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland. Where was your first gig as a program director?
I went to 4MK in Mackay from 3TR, and that was my first job as a program director. So I'd been on air, but obviously still on air at 4MK. It was, you still pulled a shift as the program director. Man, I look back on it now. I knew nothing, absolutely nothing. Learning fast on the job.
Oh yeah, what do you think? You got a few things wrong?
When I went there, it was a very eclectic mix of just, you'd listen to it and you go, well, don't know what's coming next. I came out of a radio station in 3TR that was really well formatted. One of the first things I did is I put really solid formatting in place. They really didn't even have hourly clocks when I went there. So we started getting amazing feedback. Oh, wow, this all sounds really good. Interestingly, after about 3 months, a really solid lot of feedback started coming back out of the community about this sounds the same all the time. And so I learned a really good lesson there that formats are great, but overuse the format and don't let it breathe. It becomes pretty bland pretty quickly, and that's what I learned, that big lesson there. You have to let a radio station live and breathe and be organic. That was a great teacher for me for my future programming roles. And in some ways, that lesson of that, I've carried that through into, jobs that I've had outside of radio. The fact of, guidelines, rules, structure, they're really good things to have in place. They help to create the structure and certainty around which you build things. But if it rules things, then often it goes wrong. And that's as true in radio as it is in the public service, as it is in private sector jobs, etc. That concept of allowing the people to do their jobs with guidance and with some form of structure around them has carried forward into every job I've had, really.
What happened after that?
That's when I came to Canberra. So I was given the opportunity to come and work at that stage on 2CA. After about 6 weeks, I reckon it was, there was a all-staff meeting at very short notice, and they were always like big news, and we found out that 2CA was being sold to Kevin Blyton's network.
Yep. The big shake-up.
It was, yeah, and 104.7 and Mix 106.3 were forming a joint venture under the banner of Canberra FM. So I remained with the 2CA operation, and I actually did the very last shift out of the Jollymont Centre, and literally the techs were taking the studio door off while I was on air. So it was being packed up around me. So yeah, so I went over there and worked probably for about 6 months. For Kevin's group, and then Steve Mummery very casually was like, I need you to dog sit I'm going to Sydney for the weekend, can you dog sit my dog for the weekend? Well, I was like, yeah, cool, no worries, because Steve and I were good mates. Oh, and by the way, I've got something going over here, are you interested in coming across to Mix? So yeah, like, cool, yeah, love to. And then, I was fortunate enough to be given the job as program director of Mix 106.3.
Yeah, because I worked at 104 and 106 in Canberra for a very short time as well, doing karting back very early in my career. I know from other program directors in ARN and Australia that I've spoken to that the joint venture was great, but it also became a little bit of a Siberia, for want of a better term, because no one in ARN wanted to tell Canberra anything. No one in Australia wanted to tell Canberra anything. Was that good or bad? I mean, I could see it could go either way. You could have had a lot of autonomy, or did you find that you were kind of out in the cold?
It was both. It was dead set both. Programming there, it very definitely was Siberia in some respects, especially in the early couple of years. ARN people didn't trust us that we weren't going to leak secrets. So basically the ARN programming team under the joint venture arrangements weren't meant to be talking to us. And the Austereo team, while they were responsible and, did a great job of lending us support, they were always a little bit sceptical, I think, of, can we really trust these people? And, I found when I became program director there, I had to build relationships. And, this was probably another great lesson out of that experience of becoming a program director in that environment. And it served me so well through the rest of my career is the world goes round on trust. Once eventually they worked out they could trust me, they kind of left me alone. And so it was a great radio station from that perspective in that you could experiment.
What sort of experiments did you run? What are you talking about?
Say, for example, on Mix 106.3, at one stage I hired pretty much an all-female lineup. This was in the early 2000s.
And I think that would have suited that format really well. It was a soft
an adult
AC.
Contemporary station. I don't know. I might be wrong. Maybe that wouldn't have been a thing for other stations, but there wasn't really anybody else around doing it. And I kind of got the impression that it might not have been acceptable elsewhere. And to me, that was just one of those little things that I had the opportunity to do. And it came about not because I wanted to put all women across the radio station. I came out because I wanted to put the best people on the radio station, and they were all women. And
so while you were in Canberra, you would have been the program director there during as a Canberran who happened to be in town at the time. It was a very frightening time, the 2003 bushfires.
Yeah, it was.
How did the radio stations perform, do you think, at that time?
Yeah, look, I think we performed really, really well. We had amazing people doing amazing things that day. And just you even asking that question still sends shivers down my spine. It was...
Me too.
An incredible, incredible time in the community in Canberra. Everyone who lived through that here in Canberra has a very strong shared experience. The whole team on both radio stations literally just arrived at work. I didn't have to call people. They all just came in, and then they went out, and they were out in the community, phoning in, doing their best to keep people updated. We were just running it hot in the studios with, getting people on air who could just take calls, get information to where the emergency services communication system broke down that afternoon. Literally, it collapsed, and this affected all radio stations and TV stations, any sort of emergency broadcasters. And we were in the dark for quite a while. It's a real moral dilemma situation, and you're making it up on the fly. What do you do when you don't have an official word coming from the official government emergency services agency? What are you telling the community? What information are you putting to air? Because you don't want to create panic. There's enough of that going on out in the community, but you've got to keep people as safe as you can. I got word that there was a thing going on at the Emergency Services Agency. I tracked down somebody who I knew, one of the ABC journos, Clarissa Thorpe. Everyone mucks in together in times of emergency. Clarissa literally got a phone, shoved it up, got me a grab, and I got it on air on the radio stations just to try and calm some of the panic in the community. In that time, it was also, we were very concerned for people across our radio station staffing because they were impacted. There was people who knew people who'd lost homes, and we had personal friends who'd been, they had a house in Duffy. They were locked out of the suburb. They didn't know if their house had gone or not. There's all this sort of stuff going on. It was a really, really distraught time in the Canberra community, and I suppose a reminder that, the part that radio plays in times like that, where it can reach people quickly, and especially in those circumstances where, the official channels of communication go down. So what have you got that you can give the community that can keep them up to date without creating panic? It was a really, a good demonstration of how radio as a medium is so vital.
So Radio really shone that day and in the weeks afterwards. What eventually led you to leave radio?
Yeah. Look, it really came down to what did I want out of life? I actually had a conversation with Geoff Fisher when he was Group Program Director of Austereo on a Friday one day, and was offered the opportunity to move from Canberra into the Austereo network fully, which would have meant moving to Newcastle originally. And I said to Geoff, look, great, thank you for the opportunity. Can I just talk with my wife about it over the weekend? On the Saturday, we found out my wife was pregnant with our second child. And it was that case of we were connected here and we wanted to remain here while we went through, the birth of my daughter, who, is now grown up and engaged. So I rang Geoff on the Monday morning and said, thank you so much for the offer, but I'm going to turn it down on this occasion. Not sure that anybody had ever really turned Geoff down on a job offer at that stage. But it was about, for us, that was an important time of our life. As the kids started to grow and were embedded in various things, it all came down to, well, what do we want? And I remember a morning, I reckon my son was probably about 4, wasn't at school yet, and my daughter would have been about 2. And we'd been through a pretty horrendous time. My daughter didn't learn about sleep until she was about 4 years old. She didn't know it had been invented. And so, we were living on no sleep for a few years. At work, I was pretty full on. We had a pretty new breakfast show on 104.7 and, a lot of work going into that. We were just about to go into survey. It was a full-on time. And I remember one morning, about 6:45 in the morning, I was listening to a break on one of the breakfast shows, and my son, he was an early riser, and he was up with me. And he came up and he said, Dad, can you get these bits of Lego apart? And I turned around to him and said, mate, you've interrupted me. I'm trying to listen to this, and you're just going to have to wait till Mum gets up and we can deal with it. And it was a really poor thing of me to say, and I'm not proud of that. And he just looked at me, and as, the wisdom of a child, Andy, he said to me, why do you always go to work so early? And about 10 minutes later, I did the handover to my wife, and I got in the car and I'm driving to work, and I thought to myself, why do I always go to work so early? And it wasn't about the hours. I never, ever minded doing long hours, and, subsequently, and in the job that I've just come out of in consulting, I do long hours. It's never about the hours. What it actually was about what I wanted out of life. I just put my job way ahead of my family. And I reflected on that. It came down to, actually, we're pretty settled here in Canberra, or well connected into the community. My wife had a great job. And to go programming in metro markets probably would have been a whole lot of stress on that. And that would be about me rather than about my family. And so I started looking around, and at that point, out of sheer curiosity, I applied for a job in the public service, not for a moment thinking that I was even going to have any skills that would translate into the public service. And as it turns out, I got that job.
Which department was that?
That was the Australian Taxation Office. It was the ATO. In terms of ends of the spectrum, Andy, radio in one end and the ATO in the other, I can tell you.
What were you doing for the ATO?
I went in there in a communication role, in a strategic communication role. So I suppose my radio career and just the way I thought about connecting with an audience, which is what you learn by being in radio, that stood me in good stead. And I probably thought a bit differently to career public servants, and that was actually really useful. I got to design the whole strategy around how we'd communicate to combat the cash economy in Australia, and designing the communication strategy for that and presenting at cash economy conferences, international conferences, in front of delegates from, Sweden, England, Canada, Singapore, flying in from all around the world to come to these, to compare notes on how different jurisdictions were dealing with the cash economy. So, I got to do stuff like that. Yeah. So I had some amazing opportunities, and it was a good thing. But that's kind of the decision was all based around ultimately what do I want out of life and where are my priorities.
Yeah, well, Geoff, before we walk out of the studio for one last time, I know the techs have already removed the door and it's on a ute over to the new studio in Gungahlin as we speak, but can you test out your on-air skills one last time? Get us to an ad break. What have you got?
You're listening to Off Mic with the legendary Andy Marr, and we return in just a moment when you're going to find out, can Andy open the fortune cookie without getting crumbs all through his tech gear, and what is my fortune?
What do you miss about radio?
Fun times. There's always good fun stuff going on inside of a radio station, and I still miss that. I miss the creative side. I've probably moved, less into creative roles. I think anyone who works in radio has got a strong creative streak. I miss that fast-paced action, but the pace thing, it's probably why I eventually, after many years, made my way back into the private sector. That pace of radio, and the pace of a consulting job, pretty similar. So, you bring your old things back again, I guess.
So what don't you miss about radio?
The flip side of the coin, Andy, I don't miss the pace sometimes, and the things that look, some of the things that as a program director in a market like Canberra, you were involved in everything. And, the 4 a.m. phone call that the radio stations are off air, the tech's getting a call, sure, but I'm getting a call as well. And Saturdays when, for example, my son was playing pee-wee soccer and, all of the parents are on the soccer field with them, shepherding them around, and I've got a mobile phone glued to my ear trying to sort out an issue back at the radio station that was running and stuff like that. I don't miss those things. I never minded being available, but once it started to eat into things like that family time, I could see that it was going to be a long-term issue and I didn't want it to continue forever.
So after you left radio, you moved into the public service, but then you dipped in and out of that over the rest of your career.
Yeah, discovered what it was like to be consulting back into government. Stayed there for about 18 months before going back to the APS in Services Australia. I was leading a team of people who were running a network of change agents across the organisation. So, huge organisation, 30-odd thousand people at that stage. The people on the ground in, Centrelink offices and those types of things in, Port Hedland or Moree or wherever. When a change came through the system and they walked in on a Monday morning and the whole login screen to help customers had changed and nobody had bothered to tell them that it was happening, that was a problem. So my team became the interface between the big change projects and the people on the ground who stuck their hands up and said, we want to help make this better. And we helped to sort of, I suppose, put that glue together.
Was there anything in radio that really helped you in the change agent role?
It's all about people. Programming a radio station or being on air is all about people. Ultimately, you're working in a format and you've got your scheduled breaks and you've got all that. But that whole focus on the people at the other end of the thing stood me in good stead in a role like that, because the people at the other end were ultimately the people in the Medicare office or the Centrelink office or whatever. They were the customers. But in between, there were some really important people in the agency who were frontline staff dealing with it all. Or they may have been on the end of the call centre phone, and making their job harder slows the whole system down and makes it worse for the people who are ringing, that sort of stuff. So I keep coming back to it's always all about the people.
And so after Services Australia, you then went back into the private sector, and that was your last gig up until now.
Yeah. So I went to a company called Parbury Consulting, change management, strategic communication, and coaching.
So what is that to a layperson? What are you coaching?
One-on-one coaching. I'm always interested in learning new stuff, and I kind of knew there was something else, and I kind of discovered coaching through actually being coached by a coach, and I came to the conclusion very quickly that, I've been coaching for a fair bit of my career. Go back to the radio days where, as a program director, you're working with on-air talent. 95% of your job is the people and helping grow their careers and grow them on the air, et cetera, et cetera. And I love that part of the job. And probably the most enjoyable part of work that I've done over the last couple of years is actually working with leadership teams in government departments. And it fits right in with the whole organisational transformation, because in any big organisational transformation, you've got technical change things going. It might be a big system change. You're introducing a whole new networking operation in a radio station. There's the technical bit of it, but it's all got the people aspect of it as well. Even though I'm in semi-retirement, I hope to continue doing some of that sort of stuff, because I love the people side of my work, and that's been a great bit of it.
In a kind of full circle thing, you did mention that you were back behind the mic. What were you doing there?
A few years ago, I discovered I had a little bit more time, so I looked around at some options, and I went and joined up with Radio 1RPH here in Canberra. It's part of the Vision Australia radio network. It's a community radio station. Its whole programming is for people with a vision disability who are sight impaired in some way. That involves going in and spending a couple of hours reading articles from the national newspapers and the Canberra Times, and giving that as a service to people who can't, through some form of sight disability, can't read the newspaper themselves. And, from just keeping my hand in at radio perspective, it gives me the opportunity to go in and push a few buttons. And there are still buttons, Andy. It's not digital. It runs on the smell of an oily rag. It's all old gear, and, you get to push buttons. So, it suits me down to the ground.
Awesome. Taking the lead from you, I'm now going to read you something. I need to switch my glasses because I'm getting old, but I've got a fortune cookie. Let's read it, see what it is about, and see whether it applies to your radio career in any way.
Nice.
Let's see if I can do this without spilling crumbs everywhere.
Yeah. And last night's sweet and sour pork sauce all over it.
Oh, so much crumb. Oh, my goodness. Okay. So the fortune is, people do not plan to fail, they fail to plan. How does that apply to your career, Geoff?
You're a very good fortune teller, Andy. For me, I've always been that person who was just interested in learning stuff, and I've never had a particular plan. Life has just kind of taken me, but I've always been about do interesting stuff, do stuff you enjoy, and do it with enthusiasm, and opportunities will come. The universe will provide. But in terms of putting your faith in the universe providing, you've got to do a bit of planning along the way. So one of the things I did back in the early 2000s, while I was programming 104.7 and Mix 106.3, I went back to uni. I was lucky enough to get in as a mature age student, and was able to go straight into a graduate program because I had 7 years of relevant management experience. So I got in and did a grad cert in management, and then followed that on with a graduate diploma in business administration. I didn't know what I needed it for, but I knew that it would be really important. And I actually enjoyed the learning process. I enjoyed that study, and my first time around when I was sort of 18, 19 years old trying to be a uni student most of that was done in the pub, and that didn't work so well, I found out. So I hadn't enjoyed that one very much at all, but I actually enjoyed it as a mature age student to come back and learn that planning that I didn't know what I needed it for, but I needed to get some form of qualifications helped set me up for that next stage, and that ability to go and get into a public service job, which gave me the experience I needed in government to then go on and, eventually become a partner in a consulting firm. Every experience is built upon the last one, and I've taken a bit out of my last job and last careers into the next career and the next job. So I suppose I've always tried to walk that balance between planning and just going with where the universe takes me. So I'd probably reflect on your fortune cookie and say that's how planning comes up.
Now, with your retirement plans, I hear you've got some travel. We'll work out getting Steve Mummery to look after your dog. And
he owes me one.
Yeah. And we wish you and Karen and the kids all of the joy and success that anyone would hope for in the years and decades to come. Thanks so much for coming on, Geoff. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to have a chat and walk down memory lane. I really appreciate it, and great stuff you're doing with the podcast.
That was Geoff Fisher. A great lesson on how if you take what you've learned in radio and you're willing to keep learning, you never know where you'll end up. And if you want more inspiration about how your radio skills could translate into a communications role, check out my chat with former radio announcer, executive producer and program director, Matt Whittemore.
Telling a story is telling a story. How you set up a narrative is pretty much the same. I understood market appeal, which is why I kind of got the job I did.
You can catch that episode where you found this one. And if there's something about the transition away from radio into other careers that you don't think I've been covering so far on the podcast, I'd love you to let me know about it. You can leave a comment on YouTube if you're watching there. Otherwise, you can look me up on LinkedIn by my name, or you can leave a comment on Facebook, Instagram or Blue Sky. Just look for the podcast name of Mike, Life After Radio. I'm Andy Marr. May your best years be ahead of you.